Today I have some folk tales from Japan. Once long ago, there was a man who had two sons. When they grew up, the sons got married, and their wives were from a distant village. The sons and their wives lived with the father very happily for about a year. And then the wives began to think, we would like to go home to visit our family and relatives. They live so far away. So the two wives went to their father-in-law, and they bowed and they said, "Honorable father-in-law, may we go home to visit our family and friends?" And the father-in-law said, "No." Well, the women were very sad, and about 3 weeks later, again they asked their father-in-law, they said, "Please, we have not seen our family in a long time. May we go home to visit?" And again the father-in-law said, "No." And he thought, they care more for their family than they do for me. If they ask me another time, I will give them a test. Well, about a month later, the two wives again tried, and they asked for permission to go home. And their father-in-law said, "Yes, you may go home to visit your family, but you may not return here unless you bring to me," and he pointed to one wife, "fire in a paper, and you must bring to me wind in a paper." Well, the two women were so delighted that they were going to go home that they immediately made the journey, and they had a wonderful visit with their relatives and their friends, and it was almost time to return to their husbands, and then they remembered what their father-in-law had told them. And they thought, how are we going to get fire in a paper and wind in a paper? So they went to visit a wise man. And the wise man said, "Oh, in all of Japan, there is no way to bring fire in a paper or wind in a paper." So they went to visit another wise man, and he gave them the same answer. They went to every wise man they could think of, and they all said the same thing, that they'd been given an impossible task. So the two women went into a forest, and in a sacred grove, they began to cry and moan, for they could not return to their husbands. And from the sacred grove, there came a voice. "Why are you crying? My trees cannot grow in so much salt water." And the women said, "Why should we not cry? We've been given an impossible task. Our father-in-law told us we could not return home unless we brought him fire in a paper and wind in a paper." And the voice said, "It is not impossible. I will show you how." And from nowhere, a paper floated down from the sky, and it folded itself into a lantern. And the voice said, "Put a candle inside the lantern, and you will have fire in a paper." And he gave it to one wife. "But what about me?" said the second wife. "How can I bring home wind in a paper?" And the voice said, "That is even easier." And another piece of paper floated down from the sky, and then twigs from the tree floated down, and the paper folded itself in and out amongst the twigs and became a fan. "Now," said the voice, "see how you can bring wind right to your face with a paper." So the two women thanked the mysterious voice, and they returned to their father-in-law's house, bringing him the first Japanese lantern and the first Japanese fan. And the father-in-law was delighted not only with the gifts that the women had given him, but that he had such fine, obedient, loving daughters-in-law. And that's the story of the lantern and the fan. Now, if I was really Japanese, I could stay sitting like this for a long time, but it's getting a little bit uncomfortable, so I think I'm going to be very Western and sit up here. Now, The story that I'm going to tell you today comes from this book, Les Miserables. And the section is one that my mother used to tell me when I was a little girl at Christmas time. This book, Les Miserables, means the miserable ones, and it is about a man named Jean Valjean. His sister had many children, and they were very poor. His sister's children were starving, so he stole a loaf of bread to feed them and was caught. And for that, he was put in prison for 20 years. When he got out of prison, he still was very bitter towards all people, but he met a bishop who showed him that humanity was not all bad. And he changed. He became very rich, and he used all of his money to help other people. One of the people that he helped was a woman named Fantine. Fantine had a little girl whom she could not care for, so she left her with practically strangers and went off to earn money. When Fantine was dying, on her deathbed, she made Jean Valjean promise that he would find and take care of her daughter named Cosette. It was Christmas, 1823, in the little French town of Montfermeil. And it had been a very warm winter. There'd been hardly any snow or frost, and many peddlers and jugglers came to the town. And the peddlers set up their booths from the cathedral all the way down to Rue Boulanger. Now on Rue Boulanger there was an inn. The inn was owned by a man named Thénardier. He was a tiny little weasel of a man, but he had been in the army. He had fought with the General Napoleon, and he had been at the Battle of Waterloo and had even seen the great general himself. But now Thénardier was an innkeeper, but he was not very good at it. He couldn't seem to make any money and keep it, and right now he owed 1,500 francs. Where he was going to get that money, he did not know. Thénardier had a wife, a great, big, raw-boned woman with red hair and a loud voice. She cared only for her two little girls, 8 years old and 7 years old. Their names were Éponine and Azelma. Éponine had long auburn hair. Azelma had black braids. And their mother was always careful that they were dressed beautifully. There was a little boy, but she didn't care much for him. When he was crying, she'd just say, "Oh, go away and leave me alone." And then there was Cosette. Cosette had lived with the Thénardier since she was 3 years old, when her mother had left her there. Every month, Cosette's mother sent money, but the money was never used to take care of Cosette. Cosette was dressed in rags, while Éponine and Azelma wore beautiful dresses, and Cosette had to do all the hard work around the inn. Now, the town of Montfermeil had no water in it. In order to get water, you had to go about a mile outside of the town to a spring, and many times each day, Cosette went with the bucket to get water for the inn. Now, it was Christmas Eve. And in the inn, Madame Thénardier was standing at the fireplace cooking supper. Monsieur Thénardier was sitting at the table drinking with the wagon drivers. Éponine and Azelma were in the next room playing with their doll. The little boy was crying and his mother was ignoring him. And Cosette was sitting under the table in her usual spot. Cosette was terrified. There was no more water. And she was afraid Madame would find that out and send her out in the dark, cold night for another bucket of water. The door of the inn was flung open and a wagon driver strode in. "I thought you said you watered my horse." "I'm sure we have," said Madame Thénardier. "No, my horse has received no water yet tonight. Cosette crawled out from under the table. "Oh, yes, monsieur," she said. He did get water. I was the one who gave him the water. I gave him a whole bucket full of water, and he drank up every drop. Ha! Look at that child. She's no bigger than my fist, tells a lie as big as a house. I know he hasn't had any water yet. He has a special way of breathing through his nose when he's drunk his water." "Well," said Madame. "Go, Cosette, go water the horse." "But, Madame, there is no more water." "Well, then go to the spring and get another bucket." Cosette walked over to the corner and picked up the heavy bucket. She started to go towards the door. But Madame said, "Wait, we have no bread. Go to the bake shop and get us another loaf of bread. Here's a 15-sou piece of money." And she gave the money to Cosette. And Cosette took the coin and put it in the pocket of her apron. And she went outside the inn. Now, the booths stretched from the cathedral right to the doorway of the inn. And the booth that was across the road from the inn was owned by a toy maker. And in the window of the booth, there was a doll. She was nearly 2 feet tall. She had auburn curls and a blue dress covered in lace. And every little girl in Montfermeil was in love with the doll. Eponine and Azelma had spent hours staring at the doll, and Cosette, too, had from now and then stolen glances at the doll. But as yet, no mother had had enough money to buy that doll for her daughter for Christmas. And now Cosette stood in front of the doll and stared and stared. "The beautiful lady," she said to herself. She was sure that in order to own such a doll, you had to be the Queen of France, or at least a princess. "What? Haven't you gone yet?" said Madame Thénardier, and Cosette ran down the street with her bucket. There were candles lit in front of the cathedral to light the people's way who were going to midnight mass, and as if in retaliation, there was not a single star in the sky. Cosette was not frightened while she was still within the town, for people were around her and she could see little bits of candlelight through the shuttered windows. But when she came to the outskirts of the town, she was terrified. It was so cold, so dark, and she was so alone. She rattled the handle of the bucket. The noise, at least, was some company for her. She walked across the plain and into the woods, but she did not lose her way, for she knew the path quite well. So many times each day had she traveled it. At last she came to the spring. Grabbing hold of the bucket with one hand, she held on to a tree branch with the other, and she bent down and filled the bucket. But as she did so, she did not notice that the 15-sou piece fell out of her pocket into the water. She was exhausted from the exertion of filling the bucket, so she had to sit down and rest a minute. Then, grabbing the bucket with both hands, she stood up and walked about 10 steps before she had to sit down and rest again. She tried to walk as far as she could and make her rests as short as possible, because she knew that Madame would beat her if she took too long bringing the water back to the inn. She walked through the forest, and suddenly the heavy bucket weighed nothing. She looked up next to her, and there was a man dressed as a peasant. He was holding the bucket with her. And something told Cosette she had no reason to be afraid. "That bucket is very heavy for you, my child," said the man. "Yes, monsieur," said Cosette. "How old are you?" "I am 8 years old, monsieur." "And why does your mother send you out on such a cold, dark night for water?" I have no mother, monsieur. Other little girls have mothers. I think I never had one. The man put down the bucket, knelt before her, and put his hands on her shoulders. "What is your name, child?" he said. "My name is Cosette, monsieur." And the man shuddered as though an electric shock had passed through his body. He stood up, picked up the bucket, and walked quickly through the woods. Cosette had to run after him to catch up. "Who sent you out on such a night?" "It is Madame Thénardier. She owns the inn." "Then I will spend tonight at that inn," said the strange man. Now they were back in the town, and he looked at all of the booths set up in the market square. "Is it fair time?" he said. "No, monsieur, it is Christmas," said Cosette. And they walked right by the bake shop. She forgot completely about the bread. As they approached the inn, Cosette said, "Please, monsieur, may I carry the bucket now?" "Why?" "Madame will beat me if anyone else carries it for me." So she took the bucket by herself. But before she stepped into the inn, she stole another glance at the beautiful doll. "Well, it took you long enough. What did you do, lie down and take a little nap?" "Please, madame," said Cosette, I have brought a traveler. He wants to spend the night at the inn." "Oh, he does he?" said madame. And she took a long look at the ragged clothes of the stranger. He was wearing an ugly yellow coat. "I have no room tonight in the inn, monsieur." "That is very well. I will sleep in the stable. I will sleep in the garret." "The price is 40 sous. 40 sous, said one of the wagon drivers sitting at the table. "It should only be 20 sous for him. It is 40 sous, paid in advance," she said. "Very well." And the stranger put 40 sous in her hand. The man who wanted to water the horse took the bucket, took it out to the stable, and Cosette set a bottle of wine in a glass at the man's place at the table and started to crawl under the table for her usual spot. And madame said, "Wait, where's the bread?" "Oh, the bake shop was shut, madame." "Did you knock at the door?" "I did, but he would not come to the door." "I will tell tomorrow if you were telling the truth. Give me back the money." Cosette put her hand in her pocket and turned pale. "You've lost the money, or have you stolen it?" "Oh, please, madame," said Cosette, "I won't do it again." But just then, the stranger fell down on the floor and picked something up. "This is a coin I just saw fall out of the child's pocket. Is this what you're looking for?" And he gave it to madame. It was not a 15-sou piece. It was a 20-sou piece. But madame did not comment on the difference, but put it in her pocket. Cosette crawled back under the table and resumed her knitting, and the stranger stared at her. Suddenly, from the next room, Eponine and Azelma came running in with their little doll. They were beautifully dressed. "Oh, aren't they lovely?" said their mother, smoothing their hair and fluffing up their skirts. They sat down and began to play with their doll. She was pretty old and raggedy, but to Cosette she looked beautiful, who had never had a real doll. They got bored playing with the doll, and they threw her down, and they chased after the kitten, and they dressed the kitten in some doll clothes. "You see," said Eponine, "I will be the lady, and this will be my little girl. And you must be the lady who comes and visits me, Azelma, and I will say, 'See my little daughter with her whiskers in her tail and how she wiggles. That's just how little girls are these days.' And you must say, 'Yes, I have a little girl just like it.'" And they went on playing like that. Cosette stopped knitting, and she took out a little box that she had, and in the box was a tiny lead sword, no bigger than her finger. And she took the sword and wrapped it in rags and cradled the sword in her arms. This was the only doll Cosette had ever known. And then she looked out, and there on the floor was the doll abandoned by Eponine and Azelma. Quietly, Cosette crept out, picked up the doll, took it back under the table, and for 15 minutes she rocked a real doll at last. But one of the doll's feet was sticking out, and the firelight caught the foot. And Eponine said, "Oh, look, Mama, she has her doll!" And Cosette crept out from under the table, and she put the doll down on the floor, and she knelt there, wringing her hands like an old woman. "She touched the children's doll with her disgusting hands," said Madame Thénardier. "What if she did?" said the stranger. And he stood up, and he walked out of the inn. And Madame kicked Cosette under the table. In a few moments, the man returned. And in his hands, he had the beautiful doll. "Here," he said to Cosette, "this is for you." Cosette could not move. She stared in disbelief at the beautiful doll before her. The stranger took her hand and touched it to the doll's skirt. She pulled it back as if it burned her. "Well," said Madame, "aren't you going to take the doll that Monsieur has given you?" "May I, Madame?" said Cosette. "Of course! He bought it for you, didn't he? It must have cost 30 francs. And Cosette reached up, and she grabbed the doll, and she clutched it to her. "I will call her Catherine," she said. "Please, Madame, may I put her in a chair?" "Do what you want with it." And Cosette set the doll in a chair and knelt before the chair, staring at the doll. "Aren't you going to play with it?" said the stranger. "Oh, Monsieur," said Cosette, staring at the lady, "I am playing." "Time for bed," said Madame. And Eponine and Azelma went off upstairs. "You too, Cosette." And Cosette, taking her doll Catherine with her, disappeared. The stranger sat at the table in the inn until 2 o'clock in the morning. And then the innkeeper said, "It is time for you to go to bed." "I will go out to the stable." "Oh, no, monsieur. I will take you to one of our better rooms." And the innkeeper took a candle and led the way to a fine chamber. He left the stranger alone. The stranger heard the sound of someone breathing heavily outside his door. He opened the door, and there, under the stairs, was a triangular-shaped hole, and there was a mattress of straw on which Cosette was sleeping. There was no sheet, no blanket. She was hugging Catherine to her, and now and then she shuddered in her sleep and hugged the doll closer. The stranger looked across the hall and opened the door of another room. There were 2 little white beds where Eponine and Azelma were sound asleep. And in another corner of the room was a cradle where the boy was sleeping. There was a huge fireplace in the room, the kind of fireplace that's never used. There was something in the fireplace. The stranger walked over and noticed 2 shoes of different sizes. Oh, it was Christmas Eve, and it was the custom of children to leave their shoes by the fireplace in the hopes that the Christmas fairy would leave a present. Sure enough, in the shoes was a coin each that their mother had put there. There was something on the other side of the fireplace. It was a wooden clog. It was caked with mud. It was Cosette's. It was empty. The stranger leaned over and placed a gold coin in her shoe. Early the next morning, the innkeeper, Monsieur Thénardier, sat at the table, making out the bill for the stranger. He was making it as large as he possibly could. Remember, he owed 1,500 francs. His wife came in. "Here," he said, "you must give this bill to that stranger." "Very well," said his wife. "You know what I'm doing today? I'm going to throw Cosette out. I can't stand having her around anymore. The way that man last night bought her the doll and gave it to her right before me, right before my girls. Oh, the way the neighbors call her the lark. She looks more like a bat than a lark. I want to get rid of her." "Do what you want," said her husband. And then the stranger came in. "Oh, good morning, monsieur," said Madame Thénardier. "Here is your bill." The stranger sat down without looking at the bill. "You know, monsieur," said the woman, I can't afford to keep that little girl anymore. I'm not a charity institution, you know. I have 2 daughters of my own, and she brings no money whatsoever, so today she will have to leave." "I will take her," said the stranger. "I will be glad to take her off your hands. Here are some clothes that I have bought for her. See that she puts these on." And he gave the woman a bundle. "This is my bill." He opened the bill. 23 francs, he said. "Yes," she said, 23 francs. And he was about to pay that amount when the innkeeper strode in, grabbed the bill and ripped it up. "That bill is wrong," he said. "Leave us. Go away." And his wife left the room. And he said, "You, monsieur, what you owe me is 20 sous, not 23 francs. And, monsieur, you cannot take that little girl away."